Welcome to the third webinar in the Back to Basics series on awards and national employment standards. My name is Michelle and I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Kylie James. Kylie is a human resources and industrial relations specialist and advisor to NatRoad Members. Today, Kylie will explain maximum weekly hours, requests for flexible working arrangements, and requests to convert casual to permanent employment, all topics NatRoad Members encounter every day. So over to you, Kylie.
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you to our listeners. As Michelle mentioned, we're going to talk about some common questions that come through to us every single day by NatRoad members. First of all, before we do jump into the content, I'd like to acknowledge the material that we've been using, that I've used to put this webinar together today, have come from a couple of different sources. One of those is the members resources section on our website. There's a range of fact sheets and information that is available to you 24/7 for you to be able to read and find out more information about certain topics. The second is the Fair Work Ombudsman website. The Fair Work Ombudsman provides a huge range of information on their website, all about industrial relations. And finally, it's the questions that we get from you every day. So as I said, we get lots of different questions. And so what we've tried to do is incorporate those in these webinars so we can share that information with more people. So today the webinar is going to go through 3 elements of the National Employment Standard, and that's the maximum weekly hours, flexible working arrangements, and casual conversion. So the first one that we'll talk about is the maximum weekly hours of work. So a full-time employee can work a maximum of 38 hours in a week plus reasonable additional hours. So that's generally considered overtime. For an employee other than a full-time employee, they can work the lesser of 38 hours or the employee's ordinary hours of work in a week. And so that's where you would look at part-time workers generally. The hours an employee works in a week must be taken to include paid or unpaid hours of leave or absence that's approved or authorized by the employer or by or under a term of an employee's employment, such as an award or an agreement, or by or under a Commonwealth, state, or territory law. And so this is something like long service leave or workers' compensation leave if a person is injured. Now, an employee can refuse to work additional hours if they consider them to be unreasonable. So this is where it can get a little bit tricky between the employer and the employee as to what is considered to be reasonable. So the Fair Work Ombudsman actually does give us a little bit more guidance on this. It is still quite broad. So even if after you have a listen to this or look at this on the website, please feel free to give us a call and we can talk through this further with you in detail. So when determining if additional hours are reasonable, there are a number of things that should be taken into account. Firstly, any risk to an employee health and safety. Secondly, the employee's personal circumstances, including family responsibilities. Thirdly, the needs of the workplace or the enterprise. Then also whether the employee is entitled to receive overtime payments, penalty rates, or other compensation, or a level of remuneration that reflects or an expectation of working additional hours. And there are a couple more things that should be taken into account as well. Any notice given by the employer to work the additional hours, any notice given by the employee of his or her intention to refuse to work the additional hours, the usual patterns of work in the industry, the nature of the employee's role and the employee's level of responsibility, whether the additional hours are in accordance with the averaging provisions included in an award or an agreement that is applicable to the employee, or an averaging arrangement agreed to by an employer and an award agreement-free employee, or any other relevant matter. As I mentioned, They are quite broad, so if you're still not sure, or if you would like to sort of talk about your situation in particular, please give us a call and we can help you navigate this part of the legislation. So I've included some examples in awards here just to have a look at what the hours of work are like in these particular awards that are common to our industry. First of all, the Road Transport and Distribution Award. Clause 13 outlines the ordinary hours of work. So generally speaking, it's 38 hours per week. Now people can work them on different cycles. So you've got 38 hours on a work cycle, not exceeding 7 consecutive days, 76 hours, not exceeding 14 consecutive days, 114 hours, not exceeding 21 consecutive days, or 152 hours, not exceeding 28 consecutive days. So the ordinary hours of work for a casual employee will also be up to that 38 hours per week. Generally speaking, the ordinary hours of work must not exceed 8 hours per day. But also the span of hours that these hours can be worked in is generally between 5:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. The next award that I've got here is the Long Distance Award, which is a little bit different. Again, Clause 13 in this particular award actually outlines the ordinary hours of work. So their ordinary hours of work under this particular award is an average of 38 hours per week, and that's averaged over a period of not more than 28 days. There is a requirement to work reasonable additional hours under this. And so this is where the conversation between the employer and the employee can be a little bit difficult sometimes, but also, the employee might want an employee to work particular additional hours, but the employee might refuse, or vice versa. The employee might want to work more hours and the employer needs to consider whether that's the right situation to approve. Obviously, with the Long Distance Award, there's also fatigue management principles that need to be taken into account. So you need to look at those rules in relation to the number of hours that a driver is working under this particular award. The other award that is quite common in our industry is the Clerk's Private Sector Award. And again, Clause 13 outlines the ordinary hours of work. And generally speaking, it's 38 hours per week. Most ordinary hours are worked either between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday to Friday, and 7 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. on a Saturday. So our second element that we're going to talk about under the National Employment Standard are requests for flexible working arrangements. So some employees can request flexible working arrangements. What are flexible working arrangements? Well, first of all, they're arrangements that can change how a person, works or turns up to work. So it could be that they're changing their hours of work, so they might change their start and finish times. It could be how they change the pattern of how they work. So they might do split shifts, or they could do some job sharing. And finally, changes to location of work. So an example of this is working from home, and this can be quite common in clerical type jobs. For someone to access and request flexible working arrangements, they need to have worked for the same employer for at least 12 months. And there are certain rules when requesting and responding to flexible working arrangements that both employers and employees need to comply with. So I've put the 3 awards up that we've been talking about: the Road Transport Long Distance Award, the Road Transport and Distribution Award, and the Clerk's Private Sector Award. As you can see, all of the flexible working arrangements clauses are all Clause 6 in those awards, and they all refer to the National Employment Standards. So what we're going to talk about next in relation to requesting flexible working arrangements applies to all 3 awards. So who can request flexible working arrangements? Full-time and part-time employees can request flexible working arrangements if they've worked with the same employer for at least 12 months, and they are the parents or have responsibility for the care of a child who is school-aged or younger. They're a carer under the Carer Recognition Act 2010. They're a person with disability, are 55 or older, are pregnant, are experiencing family and domestic violence, or they provide care or support to an immediate family or household member who is experiencing family and domestic violence. Casual workers can request flexible working arrangements if they meet any of the criteria that we just mentioned in the slide before, such as being a person with a disability, a carer, or they're pregnant. They've been working for the same employer regularly and systematically for at least 12 months, and there's a reasonable expectation of continuing work with an employer on a regular and systematic basis. So how can employees request flexible working arrangements? First of all, they must be in writing. So requests must come to an employer in writing. Their request must explain what changes are being asked for. So for example, if they want to change their hours of work, that needs to be explained in the request. And then the employee needs to explain the reasons for the requested change. So how do employers have to respond to a request? As I mentioned, there are some rules around this, and employers have 21 days to respond, and it must be in writing. They can approve the request, but they can also refuse the request. Obviously, if the request is approved, they write that back to the employee and let them know, and it's implemented from there. If the request is refused, though, there are rules that the employer must follow. And some of those include they need to discuss alternative arrangements to what the employer requested. So a little bit of negotiation here may be required. So if the employer doesn't seem to think that what the employee has, requested is going to work for the business, they can go back with an alternative solution and see what the employee has to say. So if both parties agree to that, then the employee responds back in writing, outlining the new arrangements, and then that is implemented from there. But what happens if the employer wants to refuse the request? Well, this can only be done on reasonable business grounds. And if they firstly discuss the request with the employer and tried to reach an agreement on the alternative arrangements, and they've considered the consequences for refusing the employee's request. Again, if the employer is refusing a request, it must be written back to the employee to tell them a couple of different things. First of all, the reason for the refusal, including an explanation of the grounds for refusing and how they apply to the request. Secondly, other changes the employer is willing to make, or a statement that there aren't any changes to be made. And thirdly, information about getting help from the Fair Work Commission for disputes. So essentially, the Fair Work Commission can help in getting a resolution if the employer and the employee are unable to come up with a suitable solution around flexible working arrangements. Our next element of the National Employment System is casual conversion. And this is essentially where a casual employee has the right to request to become a permanent employee. Employers need to make a written offer to convert their casual employee to permanent employment within 21 days after the employee's 12-month anniversary, if the employee has been employed by the employer for 12 months, has worked a regular pattern of hours on an ongoing basis for at least the last 6 months, and could continue working these hours as a full-time or part-time employee without significant changes. If an employer decides not to offer casual conversion, they must write to the employee within 21 days after the employee's 12-month anniversary, telling them that they aren't making an offer of casual conversion and the reasons for not making that offer. The only reasons for not making an offer are that the employee hasn't worked a regular pattern of hours on an ongoing basis for at least the last 6 months, which they could continue working as a full-time or part-time employee without significant changes. And the business has reasonable business grounds for not making an offer. Casual conversion and small businesses are a little bit different. So if you're determined to be a small business employer, you don't have to offer to convert your casual employees to permanent employee. However, the casual employee can actually request to become a permanent employee on or after the 12-month anniversary. So a small business employee is defined as an employer with fewer than 15 employees at a particular time. Now, there could be times where that employer goes beyond the 15 employees. That means that that business is no longer a small business employer. So if you were once under 15 employees, but you grow your business and you're now above 15 employees, you're no longer considered to be a small business employer. So that's where the casual conversion rules will apply to you. I mentioned about eligible casual employees. So to be an eligible, casual employee, to be able to request the casual conversion, that casual employee needs to have been employed by the employer for at least 12 months, needs to have had worked a regular pattern of hours on an ongoing basis for at least the last 6 months, and they could continue working these hours as a full-time or part-time employee without significant changes. An employee isn't eligible to make a request if in the last 6 months they've refused an offer from their employer to convert to permanent employment, their employer has told them in writing that they won't be making an offer of casual conversion because there was reasonable ground not to make the offer, their employer has refused another request for casual conversion because there was a reasonable ground to refuse the request. The casual employers who believe they're eligible to become a permanent employee can make a request for conversion every 6 months. So if you're not sure where you're sitting with your casual employees, whether you need to offer the option to convert them to permanent or not, please give us a call and we can actually talk through your situation and determine whether you should be doing that or whether you fit under the small business employer category. I've just put a couple of examples in the award again, just in relation to the Long Distance Award, the Road Transport and Distribution Award, and the Clark's Private Sector Award. Again, all of these clauses are in a very similar place in the awards. So 11.4 in the Long Distance Award, and then clause 11.5 in both the Road Transport and Distribution Award and the Clark's Private Sector Award. All of them are pretty much the same clause, and they're all referring back to the National Employment Standards. So all that we talked about today around that casual conversion applies to all of those 3 awards. So in summary, with these 3 National Employment Standard elements that we've actually gone through, first of all, the minimum weekly hours that can be worked by an employee is generally set out in the NES or the relevant award. Any additional hours must be reasonable. The employee can refuse to work additional hours. And this is where we've got to look at what is reasonable and have a look at those examples that the Fair Work Ombudsman gives as to, do any of them fit into whether it's deemed to be reasonable or not. Flexible working arrangements can be requested by employees, and there are rules around requesting and responding to flexible working arrangements. And finally, employers other than small business employers must offer eligible casual employees to be converted to a permanent arrangement. And that's the end of our webinar today, and I'll hand back to Michelle. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Kylie. Please remember, if you are a NatRoad member, you can call for advice and support regarding award rates and national employment standards. Even if you are across the information and just want to double check that what you're doing is correct, you're welcome to call. Our number is 1-800-272-144, or you can email membership@natroad.com.au. Thank you to PACA and the Dealer Industry Fund for sponsoring this webinar.